One of the realities of working in Photoshop is sometimes we get images that just don't fit into the category of like, oh look, she's standing on a white background, or there's a nice solid blue background, something that's not going to be easy. And this is a good example. I want to make the sky more intense, which means I need to select it first. Well, I'm not sure offhand what automatic selection tool I could even try to use, because Magic Wand or Quick Selection Tool probably is going to do it. Even Select Color Range, which often does a pretty good job for us. Here, as we can see, the problem is it's doing a pretty good job, but then I have to start to add in the clouds, and I'm still missing some pieces, so there will still be occasions where that doesn't quite work. So one of the possible solutions, and we'll look at this in a couple of different examples, is how we can make a channel-based selection. Now, in an earlier class we talked about how to save your selection as a channel. So just as a review, not that I would do this, but if I'd made a selection and I said save selection, clicked OK, and then looked at my channels palette, you would see this thing called Alpha 1, which means it's that additional channel, and it is a mask. So with that in mind, here's one of the things that we can do is actually build that same kind of mask alpha channel using the existing channels. And what we do here in the channels palette, we can look at each of the three channels, red, green, and blue, and try and find one that's already giving us a head start towards what we need. When you think about it, what we need is all this sky and clouds to be white, the branches and the wall to be black, because that's what our mask would eventually look like. So as I look through them, in this particular case, it looks like the blue channel is the one we're going to use, and quite often it is. Often the blue channel is the one we want to use. Now, this next step is incredibly vitally important, and that is we don't want to work on the blue channel, we want to duplicate it. So we take that blue channel, or whichever one we happen to choose for our photo, drag it on top of the new channel icon, and it'll say blue copy. That's incredibly important at this point that that's what we're working on, because if you worked right in the blue channel, you would completely wreck your photograph, which we don't want to do. So at this point, we're working on this channel, and we're trying to push it towards this idea of black and white. So I could try, for example, starting with levels and just start to make the darks a little darker and the lights a little lighter. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm keeping my eyes on the tiny little branches of this, because if I go too far, I lose some of that detail. So I'm trying to get kind of a happy medium here where I can get a pretty good result. So that's a pretty good start right there. Another method we often use to do this is apply image. The apply image command will allow us to take this blue copy and try commands like overlay or multiply. Now, I generally use overlay, and the reason is overlay makes whatever's dark a little darker and whatever's light a little lighter. So since that's what we're heading towards, you can see it's already doing a pretty good job. And sometimes you can do it once, doing it a second time, it'll remember the same settings, will look like it's done a pretty good job. As we mentioned previously, at a certain point, not a bad idea to invert it and see what it looks like, so you can start to pick up any areas. Obviously, we're missing some information in here. What we may want to do is click beside the RGB channel to get into kind of like a quick mask view once again. So now we can see what it is that we're missing. Kind of go through here and make a selection. It's going to get those pieces and then fill them with black, because we don't want that as part of our selection. Also in this quick mask view, if we noticed anything that was missing, like a leaf that should be selected, anything of that nature, this little piece up here. So as you can see, some recurring themes here. Even though we're doing a channel-based selection, as we're building it, we're taking advantage of this kind of quick mask view to see how we're doing. That looks pretty good. If I was concerned over any areas in the sky, maybe there's a little bit of gray still there, what I would do is take my paintbrush with white as my foreground color and the blend mode as overlay, and just paint in here. And you notice how I'm not painting anything black, because all that overlay mode will do is take anything that's a very light color and make it light a little. So eventually we get to a point where that looks pretty good. We're going to load that as a selection, Command or Control, click on it, and then click back on the RGB channel before we go to the Layers palette. And then we'll do whatever it is we're going to do. In this case, let's use a hue saturation adjustment layer and really push up the saturation. Now, just to show you, I'm going to change the color of the sky, and notice how it's really only changing the sky. The leaves and the branches and the wall are not changing because of the accuracy of our selection. Let's get it back to a more typical color, but again, we're going to boost the saturation and maybe darken it up a bit just to give us the look that we want. And as always, this has worked and looks pretty realistic because of the accuracy of the mask. So let's bring back one of the images we used before. I know you're getting tired of this, but just for comparison purposes, you saw how we were able to select her using color range. Well, let's take a look at this method and see. Once again, it looks like the blue channel is the one we want. Duplicate it. Use levels to darken up one end and lighten up the other. I'm not going to expect it to be perfect yet because I still have some work to do. Then we'll do some apply image work. Do that a couple of times. Now, one thing you'll notice in this particular case, it's not going to do anything with the white of the dog or her shirt, and that's the one problem with this particular method, is that it won't help with things that are pretty close to pure white. So I'm going to have to go in here and do selection, and try and fill that with part with black. Once again, I may need to turn on that RGB channel so I can see the problem areas that I still need to work on. This, it also indicates to me I can see where there are some areas that are the other way around. This has a little bit of that pink on it, and it shouldn't, so I should fill that with white. So you can see this one is doing not too bad a job. This still has some areas I need to work on, so I would use the same method, paintbrush, overlay mode, and just go over those little gray areas that I missed. Inverse the selection, make sure I didn't miss anything major. And I've got a selection out of it that I can again apply using whatever kind of method we want. Hue saturation, once again, just so we're doing something similar, except my mask is the wrong way around, isn't it? Yes, it is. Hint number one, pay close attention to the way your mask is set up. So again, here I could refine the edges, try something a little different. Now, I want to show you one other possibility. This is something that came across as I was experimenting. Probably not the first person on the planet to ever try this, but it just was something I'd never seen before. Kind of worked out pretty well in certain circumstances. So I would suggest that you add this to your repertoire of possible selection methods when you're doing this channel-based selection, particularly if you see something where, like in this case, the image has got lots of blue in it or something a fairly solid color, and that is to change the mode of our document to this mode called LAB color. And when we look at the channels palette, you'll see it has lightness, which is kind of like our grayscale, and then all the color is contained in these two channels. Now, at first, it might not look like you're going to get much of anything out of this, but take a look at this. If I take this blue channel, or excuse me, the B channel, and duplicate it, and then simply go to levels, I'm going to tell it I want the interior part, white part, or this gray part to be more white, and this to be black. Or I could even do it this way. Click on with the black eyedropper, say make that black, and take the white eyedropper and tell it to make this white. Now, it's still not pure white, so I could push it up a little further, something like that. And then I would use a method I showed you earlier. I would do fill. I'm using the shortcut Shift Delete or Shift Backspace. White in overlay mode. Do that maybe a couple of times. Inverse the selection. Now I can still see there's little tiny bits of gray in what's supposed to be white up here right now, so I'll do the same thing. Overlay. load that as a selection, and then I could change my mode back to RGB for whatever it is I want to do next, including things like, let's invert this selection, and do another hue saturation so we can see the difference. See, that one already looks pretty good. Again, we were always getting that little tiny bit of blue, and that's just something we're going to have to live with. But that's just another method. Now, let me review a couple things about this. When you change the mode to LAB color, you want to do this early on, because if you already have adjustment layers, they will go away. So do this first. Go to LAB color, find the B channel typically, although the A channel might work some of the time. And then once you've duplicated it, convert back to RGB before you start adding any things like adjustment layers. Now, just a couple of final words about this channel-based selection. Some people use this as kind of their everyday method because they've got it pretty down pat, and I have no problem with that whatsoever because it really can be very accurate, particularly now the combination of making a channel-based selection and then turning that channel-based selection into a mask, a layer mask, which you then refine using the mask panel. That's a pretty good combination, a pretty good workflow to get you going. Having said that, particularly if you have an image like this one or one similar to it where you do see some fairly solid colors, I would probably try color range and tools like it right away just because it can be pretty automatic. And then if need be, if it doesn't work, then use this channel-based selection as another possible option.